Hello, hello, and welcome once again to a Beatles program called Things We Said Today. This is a weekly talk show in which we talk about anything and everything that has to do with the Fab Four. Could be anything about their past. We could be reviewing an album of theirs, a song of theirs, any of their music, anything going on today, and possibly the future as well. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the three regular co-hosts of this show. You might know me for my other Beatles program, a syndicated show called Every Little Thing. And I'm being joined by my other two regular co-hosts. First of all, we have one of the contributing writers for Billboard magazine, also AXS.com, for Variety, for Goldmine, and probably another 10 publications that I haven't remembered. I'm sure Steve will fill us in, but Steve Marinucci. Hi, welcome to Things We Said Today.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
And also our other co-host, and that being our resident musicologist, who is the author of the recent ebook, Got That Something, How I Want to Hold Your Hand Changed Everything, and also the author of From the Cavern to the Rooftop. And that is our very own Alan Kozin. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Ken. Hello, everyone.
On today's show, it's actually part two of our Sgt. Pepper special. On our last show, we reviewed the audio portion of the brand new Sgt. Pepper Deluxe box set. We talked about the new stereo mix that Giles Martin and Sam O'Kell put together. And also we talked about the outtakes that you can hear on two of the discs in the deluxe box set. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the rest of the box set, primarily the book that comes with it and also the DVD. Before we do that, I just want to mention a couple of things. First of all, I want to remind everybody that there is a Sgt. Pepper special that will air on PBS on June the 3rd, which is this coming Saturday, and it's called Sgt. Pepper, The Beatles Revolution, and it's being hosted by Howard Goodall. And I believe it is going to air at 8 p.m. in your time zone. I can't be certain about that, but I know where I live in Connecticut, it will be airing at 8 p.m.
Well, let me just interject from my days working TV schedules with my former newspaper. PBS outlets have their own option to air shows whenever they want to. So while 8 o'clock may be where it is with you, it may not be 8 o'clock everywhere. So people should check their local listings, as they say.
Right. Okay. So again, that's this Saturday, the PBS special on Sgt. Pepper. Also, I just wanted to mention very quickly that last night I went to see a concert with the legendary David Crosby. And it was a wonderful show. He was an amazing voice. He's got great musicians in his band, including his own son James, with whom he's written a lot of songs with. But the reason I wanted to bring up the David Crosby concert is because he performed a song that he wrote about George Harrison. And I'm not really sure if when David first released this song, he let it be known that it was about George. I know that, Steve, you wrote an article about this not long ago. But back when David released his album, If I Could Only Remember My Name, he had a song on there called Laughing, which was about George Harrison. And he told this story of how when the Byrds started out, obviously they were huge Beatle fans, and their manager booked the Byrds to do a tour of the UK. And David was petrified that he would have to beat the Beatles. He was a major fan and all. And according to David, the manager booked the band in the worst possible clubs, dingy clubs, stinky clubs. He hated all of it. And at the third concert that they gave there, he looked out into the audience, and there sitting in the audience was John Lennon. So, and sitting next to John was Mick Jagger. So you can imagine, the Byrds are in awe of the Beatles, not to mention, I'm sure, the Stones. But right there in the audience was John and Mick. And they got along great. John understood what the Byrds were doing. But he also went on to say that of all the Beatles, he was most impressed with George Harrison, because even early on, he seemed to be on another plane on his spiritual quest. And he said that he had heard George saying to him that he was going to go to India and study with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and George was really praising the Maharishi and just saying, this is the man who has all the answers. And David was really a bit of a cynic, and he wanted to say to George, look, just be careful. It's very easy to be misled. He didn't believe in such a thing, that there could be one person who has all the answers of the universe like that. And he wanted to tell George that, but he couldn't work up the nerve to do that because this is George Harrison we're talking about. So he wrote this song about it, and it was a really beautiful song, and you can find it on that album. Really pretty, and harmonies are wonderful. It had a lot to do with George and his spiritual quest. So, if you want to check out that song, again, it's called Laughing from David Crosby. But I'm not sure if that story ever came out until recently. So, also, I just wanted to mention very quickly, since we're talking about Sgt. Pepper here, through one of our very own listeners, David Rosenia, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, we were talking about the comment that Elliot Easton of the Cars made about, he's not thrilled about the remixes of all the Beatle releases in recent years in general. And so David pointed out to me that Jeff Emmerich, who of course is one of the engineers on Sgt. Pepper, gave an interview to ABC in Australia. And you can find that interview on YouTube. It's a little more than a half hour long. And, there's a lot of fascinating things that he talks about. The relationship that he had with the Beatles, what was it like working with John versus Paul, all of that, and all the different recording techniques of what he did in the studio. But towards the end of the interview, he did say that he himself is disgusted. He used the word disgusted with the reissues of the Beatles. So it's not like Elliot Easton is alone in this category. But what he did say was that he thinks that when these reissues, these remixes come out, it's more about making technical changes. And the artistic decisions that were made many years ago could be ignored when you're doing that. There are certain things that you may not hear that you heard on the original mixes. And that was the argument that he had to make. There might be certain textures that are missing, and certainly someone like Jeff would hear that. So I just wanted to get a quick response from the two of you. I mean, hey, listen, this is Jeff Emmerich talking. The guy worked on the album.
Yeah. The textures are going to be different, and one of the reasons the textures are going to be different is because they're going back to the first-generation tapes, which they didn't have available to work with in 1967. So that's going to be a textural difference, and I think it's actually probably for the better. I mean, you could argue that, okay, in making Sgt. Pepper, the Beatles were listening to those bounced down reduction mixes, and that's what they had in their headphones when they were adding new lines, and that's, what they were making the mixes with. But, yeah, you could argue that. I mean, if you wanted to make a new mix that sounded absolutely precisely, exactly like the old mix, why would you bother?
Right.
So
only if it's cleaner.
And then, well, yeah, but you see, it being cleaner is something that bothers some people too. They may not know that it bothers them because it's cleaner. It bothers them because it sounds different. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the artistic decisions, I mean, I understand what he's saying, except that they're using the 67 mono mix as a template, so they're listening really closely to, okay, this goes this way on the 67 mix, let's do that. And they did, like we talked about last week, some things differently. That last chord on A Day in the Life is louder, the little sitar bit in Within You Without You, and things like that. But I'm not sure there's very much missing. I haven't really missed anything that I heard on the 67 mix but don't hear on the new one, apart from things like stereo panning and that kind of stuff. And if you're going to argue that, well, we did the stereo panning and we missed that, then, they're arguing against the argument that I don't really believe in the first place, which is that they didn't spend any time on the stereo mix and didn't care about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, those were, I think I think, was it Giles Martin? Someone said, basically, look, a mix is a performance. I think it might have been Giles. It might have even been in your interview, Steve. No?
No, it wasn't in mine. It wasn't
Okay,
in mine.
he said a mix is a performance, and that's exactly right, and you're going to perform a little differently on one day than on the next day. That's one of the reasons we have
Right.
differences in the stereo and mono mixes, and here it is 50 years later with different people. So, yeah, it's going to be different, but, I mean, disgusted is pretty strong.
Right.
That was the word he used.
Yeah, I know.
My feeling, and I think this is getting lost in a lot of the comments I've seen on Facebook, and I've said this a couple of times to people, that this is not the official mix. They've never, from the very beginning, there's been no semblance that this is replacing the 2009 mix, which is the official mix. This is, as you say, Alan, it's a performance, is what it is. And there are, I've heard people say, I think it's been day in the life when there's things that they can't that they're missing. I forget exactly what. I'm really not paying attention to that. I'm just kind of listening to the music and listening to what I can hear. But yeah, this is not replacing anything. It's not It's not the official mix. And they're not taking the 2009 CDs out of print. Those are for all intents and purposes the gold standard as far as the Beatles are concerned. Mm-hmm. I think I realize when you go to what they've done and go back to the original tapes and all that, you've got something different, but it's not replacing the original album. It's not replacing the remasters.
Yeah,
and even the mono CDs are not a new mix. It's a new transfer, but it's not a new mix. So, they didn't do any filtering as far as I know. I looked, because somebody had asked me about the mono mix too, whether that was different. And I had to look at the materials that I got from the label, and it said it's just a 2017 transfer of the 2009 mono mix. So,
no, 1967 mono mix.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's the remat. Well, it's the. Now you're confusing me here, because I read it as
they didn't remix in 2009. They just transferred.
Okay.
So this may be a new transfer of the same mono tape that they transferred in 2009.
That's exactly what it is. I'm sorry. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. So that's where we stand with this, and I think people need to keep that as hard. As glorious and as big an accomplishment and as big an achievement as this is, that needs to be remembered. And I admit it's probably kind of hard with all the stuff that's come out and everything, and the way this thing has been received and the excitement. I couldn't believe some of the comments that came out with the day it came out. It's like everybody was freaking out, and I had friends of mine going, I got it, thank God for Amazon Prime, thank God.
Yeah. But it's nice to be excited about something, It's there are a lot of people who don't like it as well, and they're now beginning to turn up because everyone's got it, spent some time with it. I think some people are disappointed by certain aspects of it. I think there are a number of people who agreed with my comment about how the vocal sound has lost some of its suppleness because it's apparently been compressed. One of the things that people do, CDs that come out and it sounds what Doug Sulpy calls loudified to them, is they put the waveform on the screen and see whether it's brick walled, which is basically clipped. In other words, so you've got what looks like a big solid blue wall of sound instead of waves that go up and down. And on this one, you don't see that, because what they've done is they've compressed individual tracks like the vocals and so each track has its own level of compression in a different way, and it doesn't really, none of them bother me except the vocal sound, and only on some of the tracks like She's Leaving Home.
Mm-hmm.
But other people find it too loud and aggressive, and they feel assaulted by the album, and I can understand that too. I mean, I had some thoughts about that when I first heard it, but what I kind of felt, and this is where presumably Jeff Emmerich would give me an argument, is that part of the difference is that I'm used to hearing an LP or a CD, which is very mixed down, very produced, whatever. And then I think that maybe what we're hearing now is more like what we would hear if we were sitting in the studio listening to the tapes, without the intermediaries of pressing technology and all that stuff. And and so it sounds aggressive to us, but it may have sounded aggressive when they were playing it in the studio.
Yeah, very good points. I've said it many times that with Beatle fans, you will never please everybody, no matter how hard you try. And you've got purists out there who don't want any change whatsoever, and then you want people like us who would like to hear different versions of all the Beatles albums and all the different outtakes. It's impossible to please everyone. Mm-hmm. So it's just a reality. That's part of the territory.
Yep.
One person I have known for several years complained about the price of the deluxe set. He thought it was way overpriced. I'd have a little bit of an argument with that, because I don't considering how much the bootlegs are, which, I mean, obviously anybody who has dealt with bootlegs knows some of these tracks, knows that those can get pretty expensive, and the price actually dropped down quite a bit.
But it's up again.
Yeah, I saw that it's up again.
Amazon had dropped down to $117, and now they're back up to $149.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's very surprising to me.
Nah, not really. I think it was supply and demand before the release, and now that it's out there, the release is they figure they could make some money off of it. Which is too bad.
Should have bought all those birthday presents in the first place.
There we go. There we go. But anyway.
So I thought that since you actually brought this up just now, Steve, I thought we'd talk about just the mono CD that comes in the box set. And I wanted to know, I mean, yes, you said it's a transfer, the 2009 mono CDs. We also had the mono LPs 3 years ago. Is there any sonic upgrade when you listen to the new mono compared to the 2009? How do you feel about that, Alan?
It sounded about the same to me. I didn't spend an awful lot of time comparing it because I wasn't looking for an upgrade. I was just, okay, that's the mono and it's got the extra stuff at the end of the disc. Mm-hmm. But, the little bit of comparison I did, it sounded pretty similar.
Yeah, mm-hmm. I also didn't spend a whole lot of time with it either, but yeah, it didn't seem sonically, it didn't seem, I guess, enticing. I guess, is that the word? There didn't seem to be any charge like there was with the stereo mix, because that was obviously very different, where this did not seem to be different. I'm glad they threw all that stuff in at the end, as we said last week, but no, I don't think it didn't seem to be different.
Yeah, I know that there's a few people that I've spoken to, some fans, that feel that there wasn't really a need to include the mono CD.
Or, alternatively, if they were going to include the mono CD, they might as well have also included the stereo. Since you're not going to have the run out groove necessarily, which they don't in the mono one, you could actually, I think, still fit the mono and stereo on one CD. They could have done that as an archival thing, and moved some of the extras from the end of the mono CD onto discs 2 and 3.
And that probably would have eliminated some of the confusion about whether the new mix is the official mix, which it is not. So,
right.
But
right, yeah. But how did you guys feel about the bonus tracks on the mono CD? My only real disappointment was in the promo for Penny Lane.
Of course, everybody.
It sounded, yeah, it's got all this surface noise on it. You couldn't have found a cleaner copy.
Really?
Yeah, that was a little disappointing.
Yeah.
I could go to my Beatles Rarities album on vinyl. It'll sound better than that, really.
Yeah, but that's not really the promo. That's only a stereo mix with the trumpet tacked on the end.
Mm-hmm.
So you could argue that they could easily have just taken a standard mono mix from the master tape, added the trumpet back in, and probably nobody would have known the difference. At least they were honest about it and gave us an actual transfer of that mix. But yeah, I mean, someone out there, and at this point, we keep hearing about how they're paying attention to fans. They look at the internet, they listen to podcasts and all that. Someone out there must have a clean copy that they could have loaned them. But I mean, I don't find it unlistenable or anything. It's just it's just not quite up to the rest.
Mm-hmm. Any of those bonus tracks you find really interesting?
I think, well, we've already had Take One of A Day in the Life, the early mix of A Day in the Life. We first had on an acetate, from on a bootleg, and then it was cleaned up, and it appears, I believe, on Anthology, but this is a bit longer, has more before and after, and is a bit cleaner. The other mixes, Lucy in the Sky, I didn't find anything that spectacularly new about that, but maybe I missed something. And She's Leaving Home, I kind of liked just because it still had the cello parts. I understand why they cut the cello parts. I think it was a good idea to cut the cello parts, but it's interesting to hear a mix that still has them in.
Right. So. Okay. When it comes to the DVD and Blu-ray, they also had the songs from Sgt. Pepper on there, and those were in 5.1.
And in stereo, too. Stereo high res. So if you're really a sound quality freak, the high res files on the Blu-ray and DVD are actually better quality than on the CD. But I say that theoretically because, I don't hear it. We just know that these are high-res files, and then, by definition, they're going to be better. But I haven't actually even spent any time comparing them. I spent more time comparing the LP to the CD. I think the LP sounds better. Steve didn't, right?
Are you talking about the LP or the DVD? Because I did listen to the DVD a little bit, and
the stereo mixes too.
Yeah, I didn't find the mixes that. I'll tell you, the mixes, the ones I did find really, really thrilling were the Pet Sounds in the Pet Sounds set. Those were tremendous. These didn't seem as spectacular to me. But
are you talking about the 5.1 or the high-res stereo? Okay. Yeah.
But
which one?
Actually, close. The high-res stereo. I didn't find the high-res stereo all that great. I did hear people say that they thought the 5.1 mixes were really good. So
yeah,
but Alan, you said you haven't heard the 5.1.
I have. Yeah, I just didn't spend time with the high-res stereo because they're basically the same thing, and for some theoretical sound improvement, I just didn't really spend much time with them. But I did listen to the 5.1, and I listened to the 5.1 in a friend of mine sort of ripped the tracks out of the 5.1 so you can listen to them separately, which you can't do, like when you're a kid with a stereo system. You got a balance control. You can go left, right. You want to hear just the left, fine. You want to hear just the right, fine. You can't do that with you don't get like a 5-way switch like that on 5.1. So if you want to listen to things separately, you actually have to rip the disc. And I mean, unless you're going to somehow disconnect all your speakers except the one you're listening to. The easiest way is just to rip it. And so this friend of mine did, front 2 channels, back 2 channels, and the center channel. And then there's someone also has done each individual channel. I mean, those are fun if you want to do your own remixes. But for listening to what's going on. I mean, I listen to the surround mix as a surround mix first. The thing about surround mixes, and I think we talked about this when OnePlus came out, there are surround mixes and there are surround mixes. You've got Pink Floyd, you might have things flying around the room,
Right.
With the Beatles ones, Giles Martin takes, it seems, almost as a matter of policy, a more conservative approach. He just wants to put you sort of in the middle of the band. He doesn't want any craziness going on around you. Now, I think if there's any album of the Beatles where you do want craziness going on around you, this is the one. So if we didn't get it on this, I don't think we're going to get it on any of the 5.1 mixes. I can't see him going nuts with Rubber Soul, maybe Revolver. But, I think he could have done more with the sound effects on Mr. Kite, for instance, and certain other things.
Good morning.
Right. Exactly. Those things, they could be swirling around the room to some degree. There was some really nice, listening to the separated tracks. Some of them were really nice. I mean, When I'm 64, the rear two channels are just instrumental. And it's a really lovely instrumental mix. I mean, it's not everything. Some things are in the front. And so you listen to that and it's quite nice. But I found the general effects of the surround sound as a surround sound mix kind of nice. I mean, you're sitting in the middle of the room. You've got instruments coming out from behind you and in front of you. It's just that they don't move a lot, and that's okay. It's a certain kind of approach to surround mix that's basically like an overgrown stereo mix in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Gee, I would think with a song like A Day in the Life, you could do so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the orchestral buildup. You can have a swirling effect in the room if you want to.
You could.
And that could add a lot, to the experience of hearing it. So
that's right. And especially since they had all those unmixed tapes, what George Martin did is, as a way around hiring the full orchestra and dealing with the union rules, he'd recorded them several times and then used the several performances in his mix so that it sounds like a bigger orchestra than it is. It's only like 40 some odd instruments and it sounds like a full symphony orchestra. Well, okay, you've got the buildup going a couple of times on those master tapes. You could do a lot with that on a surround sound mix. And like I say,
but Giles didn't.
No, and like with Benefit of Mr. Kite, you've got the calliope kind of thing, and the steam organ that was cut up into pieces. That thing could be going all over the place too, and that almost kind of calls for it, But maybe they're taking the Neil Aspinall approach of anything that seems logical is just too obvious, and so we're not going to do it. So.
I could hear also Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the organ part.
Oh, yeah.
You could have the notes bouncing around in different speakers.
Mm-hmm.
That would be kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot a lot more they could have done, but I found it enjoyable.
All right, well, why don't we move on to the DVD then?
Okay.
The DVD has the documentary of the making of Sgt. Pepper, which premiered on the 25th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper. And it also has the videos for Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, and A Day in the Life. And I can tell you, at least those three videos are probably the cleanest I've ever seen them. And, A Day in the Life is like breathtaking. They all are, really, especially the colors, the different colors that you see in all those three videos, and Strawberry Fields especially. Oh, I was really impressed with the three videos. Let's talk about the videos
more than
first.
The OnePlus.
A little bit, just a little bit. Do you think they were kind of equal?
I thought they were pretty similar. Yeah, and in fact, I just assumed that they just used the same transfer since it was only 2 years ago.
Yeah, I didn't spend much time with them, but that was my assumption too. So,
but it's great having them there. Obviously, they belong on this set, and it's. If you're talking about really, for all practical purposes, a 5-disc set, because the 5 and 6 are repeats of each other in different formats, to have three things, that we've had only 2 years ago, I don't think anybody's really going to be that concerned about that. I mean, thematically, they belong here. And Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad they didn't throw the Tomorrow Never Knows Within You Without You love video on there.
But why would that belong here?
Because it's Within
Oh,
You
because
Without
Within
You.
Without You. Yeah,
Right.
I guess you could. Say
And let me ask another question that occurred to me as we were sitting here talking. Should they have put together a video for a song? I don't know which, but a song brand new. Should they have done a new video?
Well, they've done that a lot for their
Right.
recent projects. So
Right. Yeah, and they didn't do it for this one.
Hey, they could have given us the video of Sgt. Pepper from Rock Band. Enough people have bootlegged that.
That's true. And there's another one. There's actually another
The whole
one,
album, is available as Rock Band videos. So
right. They didn't give us those mixes.
That's true.
No, I'm kidding. Folks, I'm kidding, honest. I mean, it would have been, there's something that they could have done is they could have put a new video together and, or even something to go with, maybe to throw in from Love, with footage from Love or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of things you could come up with just kind of sitting, playing armchair quarterback.
There is a real project for a desktop bootlegger here. I mean, we've already added, just in our conversation tonight, the stereo mix, the 67 stereo mix, the Rock Band videos with the Rock Band mixes. That's 2 discs.
Okay, people, get to work and send them to us.
You could also take all of the Pepper related tracks from Anthology and put them in. And there were some Anthology videos that were a bit different from the finished videos. They could take those without the little bits of talk over at beginning and end. Yeah, there's definitely another maybe 2 or 3 or even more discs worth of stuff. And what you see a lot is with desktop bootleggers, people who just do this for the love of it, is they take all the sources and bring them together. And I think that the the official release of discs 2 and 3 on this Pepper set is kind of going to be enough of an excuse for people to sort of revisit the previous ones that have been done, like by Purple Chick and other labels, and fill it out further.
Right,
that could be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the documentary on the making of Sgt. Pepper, I hadn't seen it for quite a while, but when I watched it, I felt like I just saw it, I don't know, a couple of years ago. Yeah. And it's just so memorable. I guess so much of what was said there kind of stood out for me. And the fun part, there's a lot that I love about the documentary, but just watching George Martin at the mixing board, isolating tracks and hearing, backward cymbals from Ringo, something like that. It's so cool, even if it's for just a few seconds. Yeah. And that was the first time any of us had really been exposed to that. So, that's probably the thing that I like the most. But there's a lot of great quotes from the Beatles on there.
And the quality is spectacular.
Right. Well, the thing that really gets to me, I was sitting watching it just before we started, and I had not seen it. I hadn't really watched it since I got the set. But that special, it's only 49 minutes long. That is a freaking masterpiece. I mean, it is so good. I mean, we've all seen Beatles specials since, but the quality of the comments especially from Paul and Ringo, who kind of, be kind of not really focused in completely sometimes, but Ringo is right on the money, and so is Paul, and of course George. That footage I didn't realize that I guess was used in the anthology, that some of that George footage and some of those comments where he talks about the people in India going Beatles and you know, but yeah, I mean that is such a great special. There's no excess there. I mean, there's nothing that stuff that's. I mean, it's all very sharp, and that special is just it's got to be one of the best rock and roll specials ever, and one of the best Beatles specials ever. And I remember watching that on the Disney Channel because that's where it premiered. Tell me if you guys remember. Do you remember Ringo saying? I think he uses he cusses in that and I don't really
The Disney
remember.
special was completely bowdlerized. They took away a lot of the drug references. It actually premiered in Britain, and there were bootleg copies that came over almost immediately. And by the time it was shown on Disney, a lot of people had seen the British one and were just aghast at what Disney had done to it. It just was awful.
Okay, because when I heard that comment from Ringo, I was going, I don't remember that on the Disney Channel.
No.
It does say on the press release it's unreleased. I don't know that it's unreleased, but it's certainly I mean it's not unreleased because it isn't much longer than it would have been originally. But yeah,
it's a little different too. One of the things they did that I at least it seemed to me that I thought was kind of nice is that in the original special, George Martin is talking about stuff and he sort of, fades it in. What you're getting is the sound in the room of the speakers with George Martin playing it. And I think they've replaced that with the actual inline studio track sound. So it was done subtly so that if George Martin is talking, you still hear him talking, but the sound quality now is much better. Because, a lot of the things that he played in that special ended up on bootlegs, and they were offline recordings as opposed to inline. Right. And now it sounds really, really good. So
I'm glad you mentioned that. I hadn't. I was listening to it, and then I was listening to the sound, and I was going, "God, that sounds really good." And it hadn't occurred to me that they had played with that sound. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's good that you picked that up, Alan.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to mention a few quotes here that I thought were really interesting. Mm-hmm. Ringo had said the psychedelic period was the most exciting for him. You consider all the great music the Beatles did. Who's to say, I don't know, Revolver could have been his favorite moment there, and there's psychedelic music there, obviously, but maybe the early period was exciting in its own way, or towards the end, whatever. But I found that particular quote to be, kind of interesting. And also the fact that the way that they were recording back then was so different that they would work on a certain song and then go back to it 2 weeks later, and then Ringo would have to do his drum part. Mm-hmm. So we'd have to go, you picture yourself as a musician, you have to go back into the mood of a song that you haven't worked on for a while. So that's very different in and of itself than the way the Beatles used to do everything, which was very quickly work on a song and in some cases get songs done in a day or two.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. Phil Collins defending Ringo in the special, that a lot of his fills are very complex, and then a lot of drummers can't really duplicate what he does. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that was in there. And one of the things that I completely forgot about, which I found fascinating when I first watched this show many years ago, was when Paul brought up the that harmonica group. That they were playing harmonicas, and this was a group that Paul had listened to and remembered the way in Pet Sounds there were so many unique sounds, and I guess there were a lot of like bass harmonicas or harmonica sounds.
Right.
So they used that. They took that and they used that idea in being for the benefit of Mr. Kite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's so many instances where you can talk about how Pet Sounds was an influence. I know how Paul has said that where Brian would place a bass note, it wouldn't always be the root of the chord, and that would add a different dimension to a song, something like that. I remember Paul talking about that, and also probably the different chord changes and progressions were very different in Pet Sounds, but the sounds that came out of Pet Sounds, all the different instrumentation was something that was a very big influence on Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
And they just citing the harmonicas. You wouldn't think that if you're listening to Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, but if you listen really carefully, you can hear it.
Yep.
You may not think it's a harmonica. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool when they brought that up in the special.
It would have been really nice swirling around the room.
Yes, it would.
So, yeah, I thought the special was, for a special that was less than an hour long, it was really full of info. And it really belongs in this set. It's nice having a video with that kind of explanatory stuff, even though we saw it in 92. and the Day in the Life Penny Lane Strawberry Fields videos. It's a nice touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's this one quote from George Martin that, he said it several times in his lifetime, which kind of bothered me when he said, when I first met the Beatles, they really couldn't write a decent song.
Yeah, really.
That Love Me Do was the best they could come up with. Now, I happen to like Love Me Do, but, it is a very simple song, and it works as a simple song. But ask me why.
And Please Please Me.
Time period.
They already had Please Me by the time they did Love Me Do. I mean, they did a demo with that. They did it with Andy White the first time. So, I don't know. I don't know why he says these things or said these things.
I have a tape of George Martin saying that the first time that he realized that George Harrison wrote a really great song was when he wrote Here Comes the Sun. That's fairly late, don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, what's wrong with Taxman? What's wrong with While My Guitar Gently Weeps?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, to name a couple.
Geez, I think they were pretty darn good. Within You, Without You. I mean, it's a masterpiece.
Okay, own up, guys. When you Ken, maybe you were too young, but Steve, when that album first came out, did you skip Within You, Without You when you played it?
God, I don't remember.
Yeah, we always used to skip it. We just really didn't like it, and now I think it's it's just an incredible track. But
I think so.
When you're 12, it's
Well, I do remember separating it out and listening to the laugh track at the end, and and taking and I guess back when I was, and I'm trying to remember how old I was when it came out. See, 67, I would have been 15, I guess, or something like that. The laugh track made you kind of look at it differently.
Yeah.
And I wonder, obviously that was George's idea. I mean, that's an interesting thing to do, kind of
self-deprecating make fun of your in a way.
Right. Yeah. Very self-deprecating, but I don't remember. I might very well have, but I don't remember doing it. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, not every time, but it's.
Yeah, but I do remember not thinking of it as good as the rest of the album. It was that strange track.
Yeah,
that's what it was. That's what it was.
Well, it's fine for us to recognize the brilliance of that song now, but I have an article. I think it's available on my website because I'm collecting all the Sgt. Pepper articles that I'm seeing on the internet, and there's one article rating Sgt. Pepper songs from best to worst.
Yeah.
And Within You, Without You is considered the worst. 50 years later already, there are so many people who just don't get it.
Well, but Ken, something has to be the worst if you're going to rate all the songs. It just...
that's such a stupid thing to do. I know. Hate that.
It's like, which of the Beethoven symphonies is the worst? I mean...
Yeah, I mean... God. I mean, that's for people who really don't get it, I suppose.
Now, Steve, people who don't get it write articles saying that Sgt. Pepper turned rock music into men's music because until then, apparently, it was girls' music.
Go ahead and talk about that.
No, I don't think we need to. But I mean, there's quite obviously a historically clueless article by someone who clearly wasn't alive at the time and didn't quite understand that rock music was for everybody all along. And that, seemingly we all hallucinated everything before Sgt. Pepper, like Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly and Dylan, the Stones, all those other things, because we all thought that they were for everybody. But now we're told that actually everything until Sgt. Pepper was mainly for little girls, and Sgt. Pepper transformed rock into music for men. I don't know. Hey, And at the end, she says, she resents Sgt. Pepper because, allows people to look back at other kinds of music condescendingly if it was written and recorded for people who look like her. And I don't think that it's about looking like her. I think people condescend to people like her if they think like her, analyze her like her, and write articles with no sense of what the hell's going on. That's what people condescend to. Mm-hmm. Just saying.
Just looking at the at the list of so many our Sgt. Pepper 50 articles. Some of the things that got pulled out are just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's the way it usually is anyway with,
It is.
with trying to make a distinctive piece to get some attention as you pull out. And that's one of them, what you were referring to there. I mean, that's just
I'll tell you, though, I collect them, too. And what I do is I cut and paste them into a Word document. And, I just do this with all Beatles-related articles every year. It gives me a nice searchable document. And at this point, there's so much going on that I have it divided into quarterly files because they just get too big as Word documents. Mm-hmm. So since April, and this includes things that have been published about the Beatles individually and some other things, but it's mostly is Sgt. Pepper stuff. And since April 1st, so the announcement of this set was like April 4th or 5th, since April 1st, I've got a file that's something like 400 pages long with Pepper articles mostly. Wow. Rolling Stone is doing a track by track, which, some of those I thought were quite good. They've got a lot of information. Haven't run into too much I didn't know before, apart from what Melanie Coe is doing now. Melanie Coe, as you both know, maybe some of our readers don't, is the girl who ran away from home in She's Leaving Home, who the Beatles had actually met, it turns out, a couple of times, when she was on Ready, Steady, Go in a dance miming contest, and she won. And then it turned out to be the same girl. I don't think they knew it at the time. But anyway, they tracked her down and they talked to her, and that was interesting. And I think Ultimate Classic Rock magazine is doing a track by track too. It's different person doing it. So a lot of interesting stuff out there.
I got to tell you, I'm just completely consumed with it, and I've been loving every minute of it. Because Sgt. Pepper, you can look at that album from so many angles. You can write about that album, whether it's their greatest album, why is it so important, is it really better than Revolver, or is Revolver really their best, was it the Beatles at their peak? You can go on and on. It's so many different topics when it comes to Sgt. Pepper. And I love, the good and the bad reviews. Mm-hmm. And, it's just a lot of fun. The fact that one album can generate so much interest that you can look at it from so many different angles.
Yep.
And, and I collected many of them on my website if you want to check out the important links page on my website. There's even one article where the writer thought that Sgt. Pepper possibly could have been the Beatles' worst album because he felt that he was basically a rock and roller, this writer. He loved the early stuff, the simple stuff. Play Roll Over Beethoven. That's rock and roll. Sgt. Pepper is not rock and roll. What are the Beatles doing talking about a circus in one song here? And Indian music with this spirituality here, and a dance hall song like When I'm 64. To some people, that's not rock and roll. She's Leaving Home. Beautiful classical elements in She's Leaving Home, which they'd already done with Yesterday and Eleanor Rigby. But to some people, this was artistically on such a higher level that they couldn't relate to it.
Well, that was basically the same argument that Richard Goldstein made when he wrote a negative review of the album for the Times in 1967, that it wasn't rock and roll and he thought it was a little pretentious. This is to sort of limit a group like the Beatles to say you must do rock and roll and only rock and roll, and anything else that you might want to do that might elevate your music, might elevate the form, might redefine the form. No, that's verboten. You must use a 1-4-5 chord progression. Anything other than that will result in a fine, possibly jail time. But yeah, hey, what can you say? Takes all kinds.
Well, for those of us who love the Beatles for so many reasons, one of the reasons why we love them is because they broke down the doors in every way. So Sgt. Pepper was, one example of that. A very big example, too. Yeah. Let's talk about the book and what you guys thought about it. There's a lot of different chapters in there.
Yep.
I especially love the Kevin Howlett chapter where he goes song by song, the background, how the songs were written, and also how each song was recorded, and also pointing out the specific outtakes that are used in the box set.
Right.
I found that to be very helpful. What were some of the highlights for you guys? How about you, Alan?
A lot of highlights in this book. For me, one of the highlights is the fact that handwritten manuscripts for every single song are included.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
That was a thing to do.
And in addition, some of the paperwork, some of the track sheets, some of George Martin's notes about what speeds things are recorded at, and stuff like that. Letters from EMI whining about the cost of the cover. Letters from the BBC saying that they had to ban A Day in the Life. So just. Even if you don't even read anything, which I don't recommend is the approach to take, even if you just look at the pictures, there's spectacular stuff in here, stuff that we haven't seen before. But yeah, the articles are great too. I kind of was a little surprised that for the studio rundown that Mark Lewison didn't write it. I suppose he's not the only person on the planet who can deal with the stuff, but he is sort of the name brand, and we're talking about the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper, and why not, another name brand, It could be, I haven't asked him, it could very well be that he's too consumed with Volume 2 of the trilogy, and in which case, he should be, because we want to have that out while we're still able to read. But, and Kevin Howlett actually, it's interesting because he does challenge a couple of things from Mark's book, particularly Strawberry Fields, and the keys that the various versions were recorded in. And I guess the biggest difference in his version, apart from what the keys actually are, is that we've always been told that one version was sped up, one version was slowed down, and they met in the middle. He says only that the orchestral version was slowed down. But he also puts it at a higher key than anybody had before, or puts the other at a lower key. I think he puts the Take 7 in the key of A, which I don't think anybody thought before. And one of the problems here is that these things were recorded on varispeed, so that, they might have recorded it. I think they explain in the book that 50 cycles per second is what it took for the machines to run at normal speed, and they could change the speed of the machine by increasing or decreasing the number of cycles per second of electricity it was getting. And so in some cases they recorded things more at a slower speed, so that when you played it back at the normal 50 cycles a second, it would be faster and higher. And I don't know I don't know to what degree it really is documented what every single take was recorded at. There are some facsimiles of tracking notes that actually do give the speed. So maybe he's right. Maybe it's surmise. I'm not really sure. Interesting, though.
Yeah, I've always been a little confused about Strawberry Fields in that regard because of the faster take, which to me just didn't even sound normal when you listen to it. I can't really believe that John's voice sounds natural in that fast speed. So maybe it all has to do with they really recorded it at a slower speed with the at normal speed with the tape slower, and then just sped the tape.
Yeah, it could be anything. They just this was the period, this and Revolver, where they just really liked messing around, with speeds. Hey, they weren't going to have to play it live. They didn't have to think about what key it ended up in. They just had to think about whether they could sing it. And if they couldn't sing it, they could play it at a lower. They could speed it down, do the vocal, then speed it up. There were a lot of things they could do.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that Within You, Without You, they played around with the speed of George's vocal. Mm-hmm. They sped it up a little bit, which I hadn't realized. Lovely Reed I'd heard about, because it's supposed to have gone up from, I think it was recorded in the key of E flat, and it's somewhere between E flat and E. Because there are musicians who study this stuff who know that they can't make it sound exactly like what the Beatles did. So,
There were also, the sort of sociological essays in here. What the scene was like in Britain at the time, and what the reception was, both in Britain and America, to this album.
Right. The London Underground, there's a whole chapter on that.
Yeah. And I think they, generally speaking, got good people to write those things. Just sort of paging through, looking for the bylines. But
I like Jeff Slate's article at the end of the book, all about the Beatles in America, how the album was received here, and going back to what we always talk about when Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, the videos were shown on American Bandstand.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's
just so amazing just to think about how much happened in that period of time. I was just thinking, because when I watched the 8 Days a Week documentary, and I love the fact that they brought out that in the very beginning of 1966, the Beatles took a break from being the Beatles for a few months. They actually took a break from at the end of 66 for a few months, which, because of the story of Sgt. Pepper, that's part of it right there, what they were doing right before recording Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, and When I'm 64. That's one thing about this box set that I love, is the 2 discs of outtakes presenting it in the order they recorded the songs. Right. It's so interesting to hear it in that order. It's kind of like, you go through the Mark Lewison book. You follow along with it.
Right.
The Beatles recording sessions. And it's just fascinating that they started with A Day in the Life, actually When I'm 64, of all the songs that made it on the album. But something as adventurous as A Day in the Life was so early in the process, just like Tomorrow Never Knows was the first song they worked on in Revolver. It's the same thing. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff to me.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's another reason that I'm not sure that anyone consciously did this, but I suppose if what you say about following along in the Lewison book, maybe that's actually a good reason to have had someone else do it, because everybody was going to do that anyway. You had the Lewison book there, you were going to page along, compare it with what Kevin Howlett wrote, and it's the more the merrier.
Yeah. It's just fascinating to me that fans could actually listen to the music that way, in that order. It's like you're on the journey with them as they're making the album. So, anything else about the book?
No.
Well, I know Steve has something important he wants to bring up. Steve?
Rolling Stone has an article that says Sheila E. is doing a new political covers LP, and I haven't really had time to scan this. It's a tribute for Prince. And it also is referring back to the 2016 election. But Ringo is going to be a part of it, and she's doing Come Together, and Ringo will be on that track. And
very nice.
And I'm trying to look here to see when this is. I don't see a release date for it. Like I said, I'm scanning through this article very quickly because I had not seen it before. But it doesn't. I don't see a release date. But it also has Freddie Stone, Israel Houghton, Candy Duffler, and she's going to do a bunch of different songs: Everyday People, One Nation Under a Groove, America, a James Brown medley, What the World Needs Now, Respect Yourself, Blackbird, which that would make a second Beatles song, actually. So that's still interesting. That's still look forward to. Okay.
And Sheila E. is also going to be on Ringo's next album.
Yep. Yeah, we haven't heard the details on that yet, how much she's involved with that. I sure as hell would love to see her back with him. But I guess that's probably not going to happen. But she was so good when she was on those tours with him. She was just great.
Yep.
Yeah. You know what else? When they did A Love Bizarre, which was one of the two Sheila E. songs that they performed in the All-Stars, Ringo actually did a drum solo when they toured. And that's something that you never expect from Ringo.
Right.
He always says he doesn't like solos. And when the DVD came out for that tour, it wasn't on there. The song wasn't on there. And I was looking forward so much. You never see Ringo do a solo. But he actually went a little wild, on the drums doing a solo, because I've seen all of his tours, and I do remember him doing that for A Love Bizarre. So there you go.
There you go. Yep. She just really charged those bands up that she was with, the All-Star bands.
She brought a lot of energy.
She did. Yeah, maybe she'll come back. I hope so.
Well, we will see. All right, this has been a great show here, and if any of you would like to get in touch with us, there is any number of ways you could do so. And Steve, why don't you give contact information for yourself first?
Well, you can get a hold of me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook on my own page, and I have a Beatles News and Information group on Facebook and on Yahoo groups that I send out things to regularly, so you can get a hold of me there. Go and you can get a hold of the show at Things We Said Today Radio Show at gmail.com. We have a Facebook page called Things We Said Today Beatles Radio Fans. We have a Twitter account, Things We Said Fab, and we're on Podbean. You can actually contact us through there. You can find the show on Podbean, on YouTube, on TuneIn. We're
iTunes.
Yep, we're all over the place.
Okay, it's all over the place.
Yep.
Alan, how about you?
Well, you can write to me through the group email. I read those, or on Facebook at Cozen and Alan Cozen and Alan Cozen Remixed. And if any listeners are in Portland, Maine, on Thursday, June 1st, the 50th actual anniversary of Sgt. Pepper, there is a program at the Maine College of Art right downtown with a panel discussion that I'm going to be on, and some local musicians and newscasters and production guys, and it should be good. We're going to have a discussion first about Pepper, and then we're going to listen to the 5.1 mix in a state-of-the-art studio on really good speakers and everything. I've heard it before. And so if you're around, it's free, and pop by and say hello.
Okay. You also have that event at the Paley Center
on June 6th.
You might want to talk about.
Yeah, on June 6th at the Paley Center. It's a program about the Summer of Love, and obviously the Beatles sort of play into that. It's going to be, I'm on a panel with Michelle Phillips, Graham Nash, Kenny Loggins, and D.A. Pennebaker. And we're going to sort of talk about the summer of '67 and from all those different points of view. So that should be fun. That's in New York City.
Okay. Couple of opportunities to see Alan in action right there. And as for me, Ken Michaels, you can email me at everylittlething@att.net. My website is kenmichaelsradio.com. I just want to say that now on my Beatles trivia and games page, I am giving away the new CD for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band with the new 2017 stereo mix, and that's courtesy of Universal Music. And either sometime between June 1st and the 3rd, I'm starting a brand new special contest, kind of different. I'm giving away 3 prizes, and it's all on vinyl. It's going to be the new Sgt. Pepper with the bonus disc in there of the bonus tracks, the outtakes, as they appeared on the album in sequence. And then there's also Flowers in the Dirt with the bonus vinyl disc of the demos of Paul with Elvis Costello, the acoustic demos. And then I've also got George Harrison's Live in Japan to give away on vinyl. They're all courtesy of Universal Music. They're all double LPs. And to find out how to win, just go right to the website. There'll be a link right on my homepage, which will lead you to my special contest page. And again, that's at kenmichaelsradio.com. All right. So, again, don't forget about the Sgt. Pepper special on PBS this coming Saturday. Check your local listings for that. It might be airing at 8 p.m., could be at a different time. So, for Steve Marinucci and Alan Kozin, I'm Ken Michael saying thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time.